March 13, 1942, 0247 hours. The English Channel, 8 miles northeast of Dover. Lieutenant Commander Robert Hitchens pressed his face to the armored windscreen of motor gunboat 64, trying to see through the spray and darkness. The Twin Pack's engines beneath him roared at full throttle, pushing the 71-foot hull through the black water at 38 knots. Around him, the channel was filled with the sound of high-speed engines, but in the dark, distinguishing friend from foe was impossible until the first tracer rounds lit up the sky. Through the mist, Hitchens spotted a distinctive shape. Low in the water, sleek and predatory, it was unmistakably a German Schnellboot, or E-boat, as the Royal Navy called them, fast enemy motorboats. These attack boats had been terrorizing British coastal convoys for 2 years, striking from the darkness with torpedoes and vanishing before defenses could react. They had sunk hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping, killed thousands of sailors, and created a crisis in the narrow waters crucial to Britain's survival. But tonight was different. Tonight, MGB 64 wasn't running away. It was hunting. When Hitchens gave the order to fire, the night exploded with a fury the German crews had never encountered. 6 powerful machine guns, a 2-pounder cannon, and a 6-pounder gun unleashed a barrage of fire that turned the water around the Bethesda E-boat into a chaos of explosions and tracer rounds. The Germans, used to outgunning their enemies, found themselves up against a revolution in small boat warfare. Britain had finally turned the tables on Germany's most successful coastal raiders. The story of how Britain overcame the German E-boats began not with victory, but disaster. In the early years of World War II, the German Navy developed a weapon perfectly suited to its strategic position. Unable to confront the Royal Navy's capital ships directly, Germany focused on fast attack craft designed to strike British shipping and coastal waters, where large warships couldn't operate effectively. The Schnellboot, or SB boot as the Germans called it, was the result of decades of development by the Lürssen shipyard in Bremen. These vessels, typically between 90 and 115 feet long, combined speed, seaworthiness, and firepower in a way that British coastal craft could not. Powered by 3 Daimler-Benz diesel engines producing a combined 4,000 horsepower, the E-boats could reach speeds of 43 knots in calm water. More importantly, their diesel engines were quieter and caused less vibration than the gasoline engines used by British boats, allowing them to approach targets almost silently. The E-boats carried 2 21-inch torpedoes, the same type used by German U-boats and destroyers. These torpedoes, with warheads containing 617 pounds of hexalite explosive, could sink a destroyer or cruiser with one hit. Against merchant ships, they were devastating. The boats also had defensive armament, typically 2 20mm cannons and several machine guns, enough to deal with the lightly armed British motor torpedo boats they initially faced. But the E-boat's most decisive advantage was its hull design. German engineers perfected a rounded hull shape that handled rough seas far better than the hard chine hulls used by British boats. In the rough waters of the English Channel, this allowed E-boats to operate effectively in conditions that forced British boats to slow down or return to port. Time and again, German flotillas struck in weather that kept British boats docked. The impact of these advantages became clear after the fall of France in June 1940. German E-boat flotillas established bases at Cherbourg, Boulogne, Ostend, and other channel ports, putting them within striking distance of Britain's vital coastal convoy routes. The narrow waters between England and occupied Europe became a killing ground, where German boats struck repeatedly with near impunity. The statistics told a grim story. From July 1940 to December 1941, German E-boats sank or damaged over 120 merchant vessels in British coastal waters. totaling more than 400,000 tons of shipping. They also sank 12 destroyers, numerous smaller warships, and killed over 2,000 Allied sailors and merchant seamen. The psychological impact was even greater than these devastating numbers. Coastal convoy crews lived in constant fear of the silent predators that could appear out of nowhere, fire torpedoes at point-blank range, and vanish before escorts could respond. In 1940, British coastal forces were woefully inadequate to counter this threat. The Royal Navy's motor torpedo boats, developed in the 1930s, were fast but fragile. Their plywood hulls, powered by gasoline engines, turned them into floating firebombs when hit. Their armament consisted of torpedoes for offense and usually only twin .303 machine guns for defense, making them insufficient to defend against determined E-boat attacks. Worse, their hard-chine hulls pounded in rough seas, limiting their effectiveness in conditions that were common in the Channel. The British boats also faced doctrinal confusion. Were they offensive weapons designed to attack enemy shipping, or defensive vessels meant to protect convoys? This uncertainty meant they were ineffective at both tasks. Intercepting E-boats, British forces were often outgunned. When attempting to attack enemy convoys off occupied Europe, they were too lightly armed to survive encounters with the German escorts. Commander Robert Hitchens, Britain's most successful coastal forces officer, experienced this inadequacy firsthand in early encounters. In August 1940, commanding MTB 69, he faced a German E-boat flotilla off the Belgian coast. The British boats attempted a torpedo attack, but were forced to retreat due to superior German firepower. Hitchens watched as 20mm cannon fire ripped through his boat's plywood hull, killing 2 crew members and preventing any torpedoes from being launched. This pattern repeated throughout 1940 and 1941. British motor torpedo boats would spot E-boats, try to engage, and find themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. The Germans, recognizing British weakness, became more aggressive. By late 1941, E-boat commanders began hunting British coastal forces as deliberately as they hunted merchant ships, aiming to eliminate the threat before it could develop. The crisis peaked in early 1942. In January alone, E-boats sank 14 merchant ships and damaged 8 more in British coastal waters. The Admiralty calculated that if these losses continued, Britain's coastal shipping system would collapse in 6 months. Change was urgently needed, and it came swiftly. The response came from several directions. Captain Augustus Auger, a World War I motor torpedo boat veteran and Victoria Cross holder, had been advocating since 1939 for better armored British coastal forces. He knew from experience that speed and torpedoes alone weren't enough. Coastal craft needed guns to fight through opposition and survive encounters with enemy forces. Auger found an unexpected ally in Hubert Scott Payne, head of the British Powerboat Company, which had been building fast motorboats since the 1920s. Scott Payne was an expert in high-speed hull design and had been experimenting with modifications to improve British boat seaworthiness in rough weather. When Auger approached him to build a new generation of heavily armed gunboats, Scott Payne immediately understood the potential. The result was the motor gunboat, a concept that would revolutionize British coastal warfare. Instead of relying on torpedoes, which were difficult to use against the fast, maneuverable German boats, MGBs, would destroy them with concentrated gunfire. The boats would carry the heaviest armament that could fit on a small, fast hull, turning them into floating gun platforms, capable of overwhelming enemy vessels with sheer firepower. The first true motor gunboats entered service in early 1942. These vessels, built by the British Powerboat Company and Vosper Limited, marked a major departure from earlier British coastal craft. At 71 to 73 feet in length, They were similar to MTBs but carried much heavier armament. The standard MGB setup included a 2-pounder cannon capable of firing 40 mm, shells at 115 rounds per minute, and a 6-pounder gun for even heavier firepower, capable of penetrating any armor an E-boat might have. The most distinctive feature was the power-operated machine gun turrets, adapted from the twin .50 caliber Vickers machine gun turret originally designed for aircraft. These turrets, electrically powered and able to rapidly traverse and elevate, allowed MGBs to deliver concentrated fire with unprecedented accuracy. Each turret fired 800 rounds per minute, and many MGBs carried 2 or even 3 turrets, enabling a combined fire rate of more than 4,000 rounds per minute. The boats also incorporated lessons learned from previous encounters with E-boats. Though still constructed from plywood for lightness, the hulls were redesigned to better handle rough seas. The engines, gasoline-powered Packard units producing 4,000 horsepower, were equipped with improved vibration damping to reduce noise. Fuel tanks were better armored, and fire suppression systems were upgraded. For the first time, crews had armor protection, with gun positions shielded by light armor plates to withstand machine gun fire and shell fragments. The first MGBs entered service at coastal force bases in Dover, Felixstowe, Great Yarmouth, and Portsmouth in late 1941 and early 1942. Their arrival coincided with new tactical approaches designed to maximize their effectiveness. Instead of operating alone or in pairs, as MTBs typically did, MGBs would hunt in flotillas of 4 to 6 boats, offering mutual support and overwhelming firepower. They would work alongside MTBs, with MGBs providing fire support while MTBs launched torpedo attacks. Most importantly, they would seek engagement on their terms, using their superior firepower to take control of the waters. In February 1942, Robert Hitchens took command of the 8th MGB flotilla. His orders were straightforward but groundbreaking: find the E-boats, engage them, and destroy them. For 2 years, British coastal forces had been the hunted. Now they would become the hunters. Hitchens, now a lieutenant commander, gathered his crews at Dover and explained the new reality. The days of fleeing from E-boats were over. MGBs would seek out German boats and fight them to the finish. The first major engagement that demonstrated this new British strategy occurred on the night of March 13, 1942, which opened this narrative. Hitchens, commanding MGB 64, led a flotilla of 3 MGBs and 2 MTBs into the Channel, searching for E-boats attacking a coastal convoy. Around 3 a.m., radar detected enemy boats to the northeast. The German E-boats from the 2nd Schnellboot flotilla, based at Ostend, were stalking the same convoy. They detected the British boats at the same time and turned to engage, confident in their superior armament and experience. Captain Rudolf Petersen, the German commander, had engaged British MTBs many times and never lost. He expected another easy victory, but what followed stunned the German crews. As the boats closed in on firing range, the British boats unleashed a concentrated barrage from multiple machine gun turrets and cannons. Petersen's boat, S-1005, found itself under heavy fire from at least 6 machine guns and 2 cannons. Tracer rounds converged on the S-boat from every direction. Within seconds, S-1005's bridge was riddled with bullets, its forward 20 mm cannon destroyed, and Petersen himself wounded by shrapnel. The German crews tried to return fire, but their lighter armament, usually 2 20 mm cannons and a few machine guns, couldn't match the British volume of fire. S-17 attempted to assist S-1005, but was hit by 2-pounder shells that caused fires below deck. The 3rd German boat, S-12, launched a torpedo, but had missed in the confusion. The engagement lasted under 10 minutes and marked a turning point in channel warfare. Hitchens' flotilla severely damaged all 3 E-boats, forcing them to retreat. S-17 barely made it back to Ostend, listing heavily and flooding in the engine room. British boats suffered minor damage, but no casualties. For the first time in the war, E-boats faced opposition they couldn't overcome. German after-action reports revealed the shock this encounter caused. Peterson's report to headquarters noted that the British boats demonstrated firepower far beyond anything they had previously faced. The sheer volume of fire, particularly from power-operated machine gun turrets, had been overwhelming. He recommended avoiding future engagements with the new British gunboats unless the Germans had a significant numerical advantage. However, this recommendation was ignored. German Naval Command, especially E-boat Force Commander Captain Sir C. Rudolf Peterson at headquarters in Wilhelmshaven, dismissed Peterson's report as an exaggeration. E-boats had dominated Channel combat for 2 years, and one tough engagement didn't change that reality. German crews were ordered to continue aggressive operations against British shipping and engage enemy coastal forces whenever encountered. This decision gave British MGBs the chance to demonstrate their capabilities repeatedly over the next few months. Throughout the spring and summer of 1942, engagements between MGBs and E-boats became more frequent and increasingly one-sided. The pattern from the first March encounter was repeated in waters from the Ternais estuary to the Straits of Dover. On April 17, 1942, off Northland, Lieutenant Commander Hitchens, now commanding 4 MGBs and 3 MTBs, intercepted 5 E-boats trying to attack a convoy. Using radar aboard one of the MGBs, the British boats achieved surprise. The leading German boat was hit before it even knew what happened. Concentrated fire from multiple British boats struck it simultaneously, killing the commander and most of the crew. The boat, out of control, circled wildly as 2 other E-boats tried to provide covering fire. British MTBs launched torpedoes at close range, severely damaging S-82. The surviving German boats retreated at high speed, abandoning their attack on the convoy. On May 23, 1942, near the Dover Strait, 6 British MGBs under Lieutenant Peter Dickens engaged 4 E-boats in a running gun battle lasting 30 minutes. The British boats, operating in 2 divisions of 3, coordinated their fire to focus overwhelming force on individual German boats one by one. S-1009 was hit by over 200 rounds from heavy machine guns and several cannon shells, resulting in 18 casualties and leaving the boat barely afloat. S-67 had its forward torpedo tube destroyed by a direct hit from a 6-pounder gun. The engagement ended only when the Germans successfully broke contact using smoke screens, leaving behind 1 boat that was dead in the water and had to be towed back to Boulogne. On June 14, 1942, off Beachy Head, 8 British boats, 4 MGBs and 4 MTBs, ambushed 3 E-boats attacking a coastal convoy. The German boats, caught in searchlight beams from the convoy escorts and under fire from the MGBs, were unable to organize an effective defense. S-13 was sunk, becoming the first E-boat destroyed by British coastal forces gunfire in the war. Her commander, Lieutenant Zuri Hans Schiren, and 18 crew members were killed. The surviving German boats managed to escape only because British MTBs, attempting to follow up with torpedo attacks, collided with each other in the darkness. These engagements set the tone for the rest of 1942 and beyond, establishing patterns that would dominate Channel warfare throughout 1942 and 1943. British MGBs, operating in coordinated flotillas, systematically hunted E-boats with increasing success. The Germans, now on the defensive for the first time, attempted various tactical responses. They increased the gun armament on new E-boats, adding more 20mm and even 37mm cannons. They modified their tactics to avoid close engagements, attempting to use torpedoes from longer ranges and increasing the use of smoke screens to break contact when British gunboats appeared. However, none of these measures restored German dominance. The fundamental issue was that British boats now possessed superior firepower in the short-range engagements that characterized Channel combat. E-boats, carrying 2 torpedoes, needed to close to within 1,000 yards for effective attacks. At this range, British MGB firepower was devastating. German attempts to engage at longer ranges reduced their torpedo effectiveness, while British guns remained lethal. The evolution of British tactics accelerated the shift in balance. By mid-1942, British coastal forces had developed sophisticated procedures for coordinated operations. Flotillas typically included both MGBs and MTBs, with each type assigned specific roles. MGBs would engage enemy boats with gunfire, forcing them to maneuver defensively and disrupting their attack formations. While the E-boats were occupied defending themselves, British MTBs would maneuver to launch torpedoes. This combination of gun and torpedo attacks proved far more effective than either alone. British boats also gained technological advantages beyond firepower. Radar, initially primitive and unreliable, improved significantly through 1942 and 1943. By late 1943, British boats were equipped with Type 291 radar sets capable of detecting surfaced vessels at ranges over 5 miles. This allowed British boats to find E-boats in conditions of darkness or low visibility where visual detection was impossible. German boats, which carried no radar for most of the war, were increasingly fighting blind against an enemy that could see them electronically. The British also developed superior communications equipment. High-frequency radio sets allowed flotilla commanders to coordinate multiple boats effectively, directing them to targets and concentrating force. German boats relied on lower-frequency radios with shorter range and poorer clarity, making coordination more difficult. In the night actions that characterized Channel combat, this communications advantage often proved decisive. Training improvements complemented technological advances. Coastal forces established comprehensive training programs at bases like HM's Weymouth and HM's Hornet at Gosport. Crews practiced gunnery extensively, firing thousands of rounds at target sleeves towed by aircraft and floating targets. They rehearsed formation maneuvers until boats could operate together instinctively in darkness. They also trained in damage control, learning how to fight fires and control flooding under fire. By 1943, British coastal forces crews were arguably the best-trained small boat sailors in any navy. German crews, in contrast, suffered from declining training quality as the war progressed. Early war E-boat crews had been highly trained professionals, often with years of experience. By 1943, casualties in the expansion of the E-boat force meant many crews consisted of hastily trained replacements with minimal experience. Young commanders, fresh from training, found themselves facing British veterans who had survived dozens of actions. This experience differential showed in the outcomes of engagements. The numerical balance also shifted decisively in Britain's favor. In 1940, the Royal Navy had fewer than 30 coastal forces boats of all types. By mid-1943, over 400 MGBs, MTBs, and motor launches were operational, with production continuing at an accelerated pace. Germany, facing demands for U-boats, destroyers, and larger vessels, never produced boats in comparable numbers. The entire E-boat force peaked at approximately 120 boats. with rarely more than 60 operational at any one time. This numerical superiority allowed British forces to maintain continuous patrols that German boats could not match. Every night, multiple British flotillas swept assigned patrol areas, hunting E-boats. German boats attempting to attack convoys found themselves intercepted repeatedly, often by multiple British flotillas converging on reported contacts. The hunters had become the hunted. Individual British commanders developed reputations that intimidated German crews. Robert Hichens, promoted to commander, became legendary for his aggressive tactics and exceptional boat handling. His personal score included sinking 3 E-boats and damaging at least 12. Peter Dickens, another highly successful MGB commander, developed innovative tactics for night combat that became standard throughout coastal forces. Christopher Dreyer, commanding MGBs from Felixstowe, specialized in ambushing E-boats attempting to transit through the Dover Strait. German commanders responded with their own tactical innovations, but increasingly, these were born of desperation rather than dominance. Rudolf Peterson, commanding E-boat operations from headquarters, emphasized avoiding combat with British gunboats unless absolutely necessary. E-boat commanders were instructed to focus on attacking merchant shipping and to engage enemy escorts only when unavoidable. This defensive mindset marked a complete reversal from the aggressive hunting tactics that had characterized German operations in 1940 and 1941. Some German officers refused to adopt this defensive posture. Captain Bernd Klue, commanding the 5th E-boat flotilla from Cherbourg, believed that aggressive tactics could still succeed. On August 12, 1942, he led 8 E-boats against a heavily escorted convoy off Portland. The British escort included 6 MGBs under Lieutenant Commander Hichens. When the two forces met, Klue ordered his boats to press on with their attacks despite heavy fire. The resulting engagement was the largest single action between coastal forces up to that point in the war. 8 German boats faced 6 British MGBs and multiple destroyers providing distant support. The battle raged for 45 minutes across 10 miles of ocean. Klue's boat, S-68, was hit repeatedly but continued attacking, damaging 1 merchant ship with torpedo fire. S-46 and S-90 also scored torpedo hits, sinking 2 merchant ships totaling 8,000 tons, but the cost was catastrophic. S-86 was sunk by concentrated gunfire from 3 MGBs, and S-71 was so badly damaged that it sank while being towed back to Cherbourg. 3 other German boats suffered heavy damage and casualties. German losses exceeded 50 men killed or wounded. British losses were comparatively light. 2 MGBs were moderately damaged and required dockyard repairs, with casualties totaling 3 men killed and 7 wounded. The merchant ships lost were painful, but the convoy system could absorb such losses. However, the E-boat force couldn't sustain the loss of 2 boats and half of its flotilla being damaged in a single action. After Portland, German commanders universally adopted cautious tactics, avoiding engagement with British gunboats whenever possible. This caution created opportunities for British coastal forces to expand their mission beyond convoy protection. MGBs began conducting offensive operations against German coastal traffic along the occupied European coast. German convoys carrying supplies and reinforcements to French and Belgian ports found themselves under attack by British boats that had both the firepower to engage escorts and the speed to escape pursuing destroyers. These offensive sweeps proved highly successful throughout. 1,943 British flotillas, often operating far from friendly waters, struck German convoys repeatedly. The pattern was consistent. British boats would approach under cover of darkness, using radar to locate targets. MGBs would engage escorts with gunfire while MTBs launched torpedoes at merchant ships. Before German forces could organize an effective response, the British boats would be racing back toward England at maximum speed. The success of these operations forced Germany to divert significant resources to convoy protection. Destroyers that might have operated against Allied Atlantic shipping were instead tied down escorting coastal convoys. Flagships and floating anti-aircraft batteries were stationed along convoy routes to provide some defense against British attacks. Mining operations intensified in attempts to close approaches to German-held ports. None of these measures eliminated British raids, which continued to inflict losses throughout 1943 and 1944. The Allied invasion of France in June 1944 represented the hostility culmination of British coastal forces transformation. On D-Day night, June 6 to 7, 1944, over 100 British MGBs and MTBs formed a protective screen off the Normandy beaches, defending the invasion fleet against expected E-boat attacks. German E-boats from bases at Cherbourg and Brittany attempted to attack the massive Allied armada, but they were intercepted repeatedly by British coastal forces operating in coordinated flotillas. The engagements that night demonstrated how completely the balance had shifted. German boats attempting to break through to the vulnerable transport ships and landing craft found themselves facing overwhelming opposition. Every approach was blocked by British flotillas that had superior numbers, heavier armament, and better coordination. The few E-boats that managed to penetrate close enough to launch torpedoes found themselves under fire from multiple directions. Of the 9 E-boats that sortied against the invasion fleet that night, 3 were sunk and 4 heavily damaged. Not a single Allied ship was lost to E-boat attack. The weeks following D-Day saw increasingly desperate German attempts to disrupt Allied supply lines across the Channel. Every night, surviving E-boats attempted to reach the endless stream of ships supplying the Normandy beachhead. Every night, British coastal forces intercepted them. The loss rate became unsustainable. Between June and September 1944, Germany lost over 20 E-boats to all causes, with the majority sunk or damaged by British coastal forces. Production couldn't replace these losses, and crew casualties decimated the experienced corps of E-boat commanders. By autumn 1944, German E-boat operations had been reduced to occasional nuisance raids. The boats that had terrorized British coastal waters in 1940 and 1941 were now confined to heavily protected anchorages, emerging only when intelligence indicated unusually favorable opportunities. Even then, British coastal forces hunted them relentlessly. The psychological transformation was complete. German crews who had once hunted British shipping with impunity now feared every appearance of British gunboats, which could pour devastating fire onto them from multiple directions. The final major engagement between British MGBs and German E-boats occurred on April 13, 1945, off the Dutch coast. 6 British boats from the 55th MGB flotilla, commanded by Lieutenant Alan Jensen, intercepted 4 E-boats attempting to lay mines in Allied supply routes. The German boats, undermanned and low on fuel, attempted to break contact immediately when British boats appeared on radar. Jensen's flotilla pursued at maximum speed, catching the trailing German boat within 15 minutes. The brief engagement that followed was utterly one-sided. Concentrated fire from 3 MGBs struck S-207 with overwhelming force. The German boat exploded in a massive fireball when a shell penetrated its fuel tanks. There were no survivors. The remaining German boats escaped into coastal minefields where British boats couldn't follow. Less than a month later, Germany surrendered. The final count showed that British coastal forces had sunk or damaged over 150 German E-boats during the war. with MGBs accounting for the majority of these victories. The force that had numbered fewer than 30 boats in 1940 had grown to over 400 vessels and had completely reversed the tactical situation in coastal waters. The transformation from hunted to hunter represented one of the Royal Navy's most significant achievements of the war.